Hey there, VisualPolitik viewers. When we talk about the Russian army in Ukraine, it is actually as if we are talking about a body with three heads. But what are these three heads? On the one hand, we have the regular army, which we have discussed at length here on VisualPolitik. On the other is Kadyrov, the Chechen leader who we also reported here on VisualPolitik videos. A man renowned for his videos on social media.
Ahmad! Allahu Akbar!
But there is a third head we are going to focus on in today's video. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the owner of the Wagner Group, the most important mercenary company in Russia. A full-fledged Russian oligarch, but very different from the others. Unlike the other ones we've already talked about, who are educated people with technocratic profiles, Prigozhin has a much darker past. When we prepared this very video, one of the most recent public appearances of this oligarch was to launch this message to President Zelensky for the Ukrainian army and the civilian population to leave their positions in Bakhmut.
Подразделения ЧВК «Вагнер» практически окружили Бахмут. Осталась одна дорога. Клещи сжимаются. Дайте возможность им покинуть город.
The prominence that both Prigozhin and the Wagner Group have acquired in this war is frankly surprising, as they seem to be the only ones capable of making any progress in Ukraine. But the impression it leaves is one of a lack of coordination. It is as if there were three different armies competing to conquer Ukraine and see who earns the most praise in Putin's eyes. Will it be Shoigu's regular forces, or Kadyrov's Chechen group, or the Wagner Group, Prigozhin's private army? But the question is, why does Russia need a private army? What does the Wagner Group do? Who is Prigozhin and how much power does he have in Putin's Russia? Today on VisualPolitik, we're going to answer all of these questions, but first, let's look at a bit of history.
Who wants a private army?
The big question is why Russia wants a private army if it already has its own. Besides, war is normally waged by states, so apparently it kind of makes no sense. However, Russia is not the first country to resort to private armies. Mercenaries have been around forever. They were already in existence in the time of Alexander the Great. But let's not go that far back. Let's talk about March 2014, when Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula. That looked nothing like what we all associate with a typical invasion. In this territory on the shores of the Black Sea, the little green men suddenly appeared. We are talking about soldiers without insignia or any markings, so that the Kremlin would have us believe they were some kind of sympathizers of the Russian cause, civilians who had taken up arms to carry out this annexation. Obviously, we all identified them as Russian soldiers since they served Putin's interests. In fact, the current war in Ukraine has confirmed these suspicions. Or maybe not. To this day, it is thought that the Little Green Men were a mixture of some agents of the Special Operations Forces and other units of the Military Intelligence Service of the Russian Armed Forces, along with contracted personnel from the Wagner Group. They were not, therefore, regular forces of any official army, but a mixture of spies and mercenaries. And here is the main reason why more and more countries are turning to private armies. Plausible deniability. That is, the authorities can always deny the involvement of the state in the actions of these mercenaries, especially in those of a markedly clandestine nature. For example, in the case of the Little Green Men, if that operation had not gone well, the Kremlin would have tried to tell us they had nothing to do with it, or that the men had acted in isolation. But it worked out well, and thanks to the fact that the annexation of Crimea was not seen as an armed aggression, Putin practically got a free ride. I mean, you all remember where the World Cup was held in 2018, right? Exactly. The point is that private armies are in fashion, and some may be thinking, oh man, neoliberalism has reached the military world. Thugs who sell themselves to the highest bidder to all the tyrants of the world. Well, yes, but wait a minute, because just as Russia uses Wagner, the United States has also used the Blackwaters, now called Academy. In the Iraq War, the Bush administration made heavy use of the services of private military corporations such as Blackwater to rapidly increase the US military presence as the situation worsened. Of course, reports of alleged abuses by some private security forces contributed to public perception of them as irresponsible mercenaries, opening a contentious debate about their oversight and lack of accountability. What the United States has done with Blackwater in Iraq and Afghanistan speaks directly to another of the great advantages offered by these military companies: flexibility. A private army can be used at any time. If you want to use your national army in a certain foreign country, you probably have to vote it through parliament, argue for it in public opinion, and so on. All of this has a political cost, people could protest. Obviously, that matters more in a democracy. But even if a guy as authoritarian as Putin wanted to be opaque, to use the Russian regular army abroad, his government has to inform the Duma. With a private company, on the other hand, Putin just has to pick up the phone and send them over there. This is how they acted in Syria, for instance, where the Wagner Group was fighting with al-Assad's forces on the front line. Look at this news item from 2018.
Kremlin distanced itself from reports of mercenary deaths in Syria.
In the headline we have just shown, everything comes together. Flexibility, plausible deniability, and another very important advantage. Casualties do not count the same way if they are from the regular army as they do from a private company. Many of you might be thinking here, what are you talking about, Grant? A dead guy is dead. And yes, you are right. But in terms of public opinion, they're not the same. Because if a Marine falls, it is the White House that is accountable. If a Blackwater agent falls, the White House is not. Another point in favor of private armies is the same as any other public-private partnership. If subcontractors normally seek to be the most competitive in order to win a public contract, in the case of private military companies, it is exactly the same. And we can also talk about experience. Before the invasion of Ukraine, practically the last time a Russian regular army soldier had been in combat was during the 5-day conflict against Georgia 15 years ago. In contrast, one of Wagner's men may have spent the last few years fighting in Syria, Libya, Mali, or the Central African Republic. And so we are talking about another advantage of private armies, that their members have more frontline experience than regular soldiers. In fact, many of the members of the Wagner Group are former members of the Russian army and are even veterans of the Chechen wars. So these are all reasons why private military companies are flourishing throughout the world, and particularly in Russia. There are times when plausible deniability, lack of accountability, greater flexibility to conduct semi-clandestine missions, and to have the most experienced troops are of interest. And this all sounds fantastic, doesn't it? Well, there is one problem. The Russian constitution forbids the creation of private armed detachments. So the question is, how did Putin get around Russian law? Who was the useful fool who did it? Let's take a look. By the way, before we continue, if you are someone who likes the world of economics, don't forget to take a look at our new sister channel, VisualPolitik. We'll leave the link in the description and up here. And now, let's get cracking.
Putin's Chef.
At the beginning of the last decade, Russia started to show interest in private military companies. The issue is that Russian law does not allow them and is even punishable to serve as a mercenary. Nevertheless, Putin himself emphasized their advantages in undertaking the state's interests without his involvement. And Yevgeny Prigozhin, the deputy prime minister, gave us a clue as to what they were going to do.
We are thinking about whether our money will flow to finance foreign private security military companies, or we will consider the feasibility of creating such companies within Russia itself and take a step in this direction. Yevgeny Prigozhin, Deputy Prime Minister of Russia in 2012.
The question is, who was willing to do something blatantly illegal in Russia? The people surrounding Putin were not up for it. They had too much to lose. It would take a useful fool, someone with a hunger for money and little fear of breaking the law. And that person was selling hot dogs on the street of St. Petersburg. Meet Yevgeny Prigozhin. After spending much of the 1980s in jail, a street food stall was the start of an entire gastro-economic empire. The fall of the USSR and Russia's transition to capitalism offered new opportunities for Prigozhin, who eventually opened upscale restaurants such as New Island, which quickly became a favorite of Vladimir Putin. His closeness to the Russian president was the source of his fame to the point of being known as Putin's Chef. Now, it is one thing if your stroganoff is to die for, and quite another if you end up being the head of the Russian mercenaries. Why did the Slovaki look to an oligarch like Prigozhin to set up a private army? The answer can be found in the Concord Group. Concord is a Prigozhin catering company that enjoys a virtual monopoly of Moscow's school canteens, as well as in Russian hospitals and barracks. This was the route by which Prigozhin launched the Wagner Group. When exactly? Well, certainly in 2014, they were already in Crimea and the Donbass separatist war that started soon afterwards. Public business data give us many clues. The volume of services provided by companies related to Prigozhin and the Russian Defense Ministry went from 11 million euros in 2014 to 1 billion euros in 2015. And this is not because Prigozhin started serving caviar to the troops. What's more, the camp where the Wagner Group trains is located on a plot of land belonging to the Ministry of Defense in Molkin, near Krasnodar. Therefore, the Kremlin's links with Wagner are obvious. The Slivoviki came to Prigozhin to finance a private army, and now it is causing them all kinds of problems.
As you know, St. Petersburg is headed by a gang of people who line their pockets and do not keep their word. Yevgeny Prigozhin.
Prigozhin feels free to say whatever he wants, even to lash out at the Siloviki. He has become absolutely uncontrollable. At the head of Wagner, Prigozhin instills fear. This is not surprising given the track record of his mercenaries halfway around the globe. His speciality is savage torture and extrajudicial executions, and on top of that, they record themselves on video to brag about it later. I assure you that next to them, Quentin Tarantino is Sofia Coppola. And yes, half the globe, because of course, if you have a private army, you don't only use it in Crimea or the Donbass.
Russian mercenaries seek gold, sow chaos in Central Africa.
The Central African Republic has been embroiled in a civil war for 10 years. Its president turned to the Wagner Group to train his troops and guarantee his personal security. In exchange, he offered them natural resources. But there is still more. There is what was mentioned in Syria, while al-Assad promised them 25% of the oil fields they liberated from the hands of the US-supported Kurds. But also Libya, Mozambique, Sudan. In the Kremlin, they are delighted because Wagner is increasing Russian influence throughout Africa to the detriment of other powers such as France. And as Russian influence grows, so does Prigozhin's business. Get used to seeing headlines like this one.
How Russian mercenaries are taking over the African diamond trade.
Such is Prigozhin's rise that in Russia itself it is generating concern among the Siloviki. The technocratic class around Putin. Remember that Prigozhin is not one of them. He generates suspicion, and the Siloviki see him as a former criminal turned oligarch, because he is. The relationship with Prigozhin is full of ups and downs. The proof is that his success began in St. Petersburg, a city dominated by the Siloviki, but his business dealings have prospered in Moscow. That is why Prigozhin has always been highly critical of the St. Petersburg authorities. Even more so since last summer when Megaline, another of his companies, was left out of the Gorskaya development, a macro project that will now be executed by a company linked to Gazprom.
Megaline said that Smolny terminated the agreement on the development of Gorskaya territory.
Smolny is the seat of the governor of St. Petersburg. It is currently occupied by Alexander Beglov, a protege of Sergei Kiriyenko, Putin's right-hand man for Russian domestic policy. That is why Prigozhin is getting so involved in the war in Ukraine. Victories in Ukraine translate into more influence in the Kremlin, but also more enemies. Check this out.
Cockfighting.
By now, you don't need to know much about the war, especially in its initial phase, to understand that things did not go as the Kremlin had planned. Russia had tried to take Kyiv on the fast track and failed. So what did Putin do? Well, within a month and a half of invading Ukraine, he turned to the Wagner Group. Putin knows Wagner's track record inside and out and knows that its men are seasoned in 1,000 battles. The problem is that Putin's chef has saved his secret ingredients, and to Ukraine, he has sent thousands of convicts with basically one promise: freedom or death.
Далее, через полгода, уходите домой, получив помилование. Те, кто хочет остаться с нами, остается с нами. Поэтому вариантов вернуться на зону нет никаких. Те, кто приезжает и в первый день говорит, куда-то я не туда попал, мы делаем отметку дезертир, и после этого следует расстрел.
In light of his army's continued failures, Putin gave Wagner free rein after the summer of 2022. It was then that Prigozhin turned to Wagner's veterans to take them to Ukraine to lead thousands of newly recruited mercenaries, deployed to the front line after a single month of training. We find ourselves, therefore, with three heads at the helm of the Russian forces. First of all, the Russian army, led by textbook Siloviki Minister Shoigu and General Valery Gerasimov. They may be very technocratic, but they are failing. Then we have the Kadyrovsky, led by Chechen leader Razdam Kadyrov. They cannot boast of major victories either. And finally, we have the Wagner Group, the only ones who can show some results. Fighting meter by meter, Russian forces have begun to regain ground in the Donbass, and Prigozhin has not hesitated to give all the credit to his mercenaries and to openly criticize the government. Here you can listen to him as you watch Wagner's mercenaries practicing shooting with two Russian generals as the targets.
Начальник генерального штаба и министр обороны раздают направо и налево команды, в которых говорится о том, чтобы ЧВК «Вагнер» не только боеприпасов не давать, а в том числе не помогать авиатранспортом, приравнивать к измене Родине.
These three heads of the Russian forces are competing to earn credit in front of Putin. The Russian president is probably thinking, hey, so long as they are fighting amongst themselves, they are not arguing about whether I should remain the supreme leader. This way, they are motivated to deliver victories for Russia, and that is indeed what is happening. Russia's most recent victories in the Ukrainian war have come at the hands of Prigozhin. There's Soledar, and it looks like he'll be next with Bakhmut. However, in order to curb Prigozhin's growing influence, in January, the Kremlin released relieved Sergei Strugovin, a general close to Wagner, as commander-in-chief of Ukraine. In his place was installed Gerasimov himself, a loyal ally of Shoigu. In addition, the Kremlin no longer allows Prigozhin to recruit from prisons. All of this explains the attacks that Prigozhin is launching against the Russian government and the Siloviki. He sees how his influence over Putin is in danger. We'll see what happens in the next few months. Imagine what Prigozhin will say if he continues to be the only one to win victories for Russia. But now, the questions are over to you. Do you think the Wagner Group will be decisive in the outcome of the war? Could Prigozhin be Putin's successor? How badly did I say all of those Russian names? You can leave me your answers in the comments below. And as always, if you found this video interesting, please like it and don't forget to subscribe to all of us here at VisualPolitik. And don't forget to check out Visual Economic too. All the best, and I'll see you next time.